We should go. Yes. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged, the book club. And I know that we have not done a book club episode in some period of time, and it only makes sense that the epic boss himself kind of took advantage of the situation to kind of do a duality. We did the Boss Uncaged live, and now we're doing the book club. So this episode, we're really going to dive into like the details of the book. So I'm just going to give you the floor just to kind of just do a short introduction about who you are, about your book, and then I'm just going to really dive in and unpack a lot of information for the listener.
Great.
So let's talk about you a little bit. Like, if you could talk about about yourself, what do you do, and how did this book come to fruition?
Well, it's great to be here again. I'm very thankful for that. Really enjoyed the last conversation that we had, and looking forward to this one as well. What happens is most of my days is spending time with family or talking to top visionaries on the planet, and then most of them are ideator futurists, and they're kind of all over the place. And then my brain takes all their complexity and ideas and simplifies it into patterns. So I hear blah 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 blah, and then simplify pattern, blah blah blah, simplify pattern, blah blah blah. Okay, um, so these are the most successful, many very wealthy, most are very wealthy, doing all these amazing things, which is great. And I talk to one to two of those folks every single week, every week,
Mhm.
that have let entrepreneur life destroy their family life or prevented them from anything meaningful. So my brain hears blah 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 blah, divorce, blah 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 blah, no family, blah 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 blah. I haven't seen kids in years, blah 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 blah. My spouse doesn't really like me that much, blah. Okay, so you hear the same thing over. And so the book Epic Life is about how to build collaborative global companies while putting your loved ones first. So um, I think that's what people like us want. They just don't necessarily know how to do it. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm a dad who happens to be an entrepreneur who sees my family all the time and then also builds collaborative global companies. So that's why I wrote the book.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I think that I'm going to jump around from like different chapters. I mean, based upon like the way this conversation goes, and just by what you said, I think that chapter 5 is a good segue. I mean, naming your years, and you talked about in that chapter about 2020 was your global growth, 2021 was no limits, and then sure as hell, the year you wrote the book and you got the title for the book from someone that you known, right? I want you to talk
Yes.
about that. Like, how did you come up with the titling for Epic Life?
Well, I didn't, but that's what I mean. So most of my days talking to the top ideators.
Mhm.
There's 34 Gallup Clifton Strength Finders. It's an assessment. Most people I talk to are top 5 in ideation. I am 32 out of 34 in ideation, which
Mhm.
is almost dead last. But if I hear a great idea, top 3 are activator, maximizer, achiever. So, oh, that's a great idea. Activate, maximize, achieve.
Mhm.
So again, everything's a pattern. So one of my good friends, PR partner, Joe Martin, before COVID, he's like, oh, I name my years. So he names his years. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll start doing that. So 2020, global growth. So every day, global growth, global growth, global growth, global growth. So started talking to people around the world, joined 2 global organizations, multiple PR partners around the planet. Okay, so that's global growth. 2021, no limits. So every day, no limits, no limits, no limits. So when you have no limits, there are no limits. There are no limits. So started a second company with someone I'd never met in person. Uh, continued the global growth with partners around the world. Uh, did everything virtually, essentially. So okay, no limits. And then 2022 was on a show like this. The first book was called Epic Business, and then Bill Bloom, was the show's host, great friend, PR partner. He's like, "Oh, just name your 2022 Epic Life." I'm like, oh, okay, that's a great idea. I'll do that. So 2022, epic life, epic life, epic life. And then when title for book, because I wrote the book in early 2022, I'm like, oh, I'll just call it Epic Life because that's the name of the year.
Mhm.
So that was just a logical. And then 2023 is Networks. So 2 words, Networks. And then the second company, the PR firm is called Brepic, and then the new company is Brepic Network. So getting that one really going.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think pulling off of that last word that you said, network, it reminds me of a statement that you made in that chapter about bigger investments are essentially found in the smaller rooms, and in those smaller rooms is where the bigger impacts come from. So
yes.
I want you to kind of unpack that, because for me, that was a very powerful statement. The entire chapter was good and
Thank
great.
you.
That one statement definitely resonated with me. I want you to talk about that.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Again, I hear blah blah blah, simplify, answer, blah blah blah. So I just keep making bigger investments in smaller rooms, but the people in those rooms are making bigger impacts. That allows me to spend biggest investment in smallest room, which is my family, where I can make the most impact. So it's the same formula. And then if you're not a litmus test for people you serve, you're a hypocrite. So you can't ask people to make big, well, you could, but you can't ask people to make bigger investments in what you do or what your company is if you're not making bigger investments in yourself. Like
Mhm.
it's a lot. I mean, you could do it, but it's illogical to me because you're not being a litmus test for the people you serve. So I guess I'll land the plane for a second. What that means in real world. I've been an entrepreneur for 6 years with zero business background. So like networking groups, we'll just land the plane with that. The first group I was in was 250 a year. Then it was 500. Then it was 1,000. Then it was 2,000. Then it was 5,000. Then it was 10,000. Now the two groups I'm in are 25,000 US dollars a year each. I'm about to join the 50,000 a year group in both of those groups. At least I've applied to do it because it's the same formula. But again, it's a bigger investment, but a smaller room. It's less people, but those people are doing cooler and cooler things.
Mhm.
And then that just allows me to spend more time with my family where I can do cooler and cooler things.
I think this is going to be such a powerful episode, because I mean, every time you finish a statement, it kind of just leads me into another thought and kind of,
Because you're a six follow through.
yeah, definitely, definitely. So part of your chapter structures at the end of every chapter and at the end of name your years, you do something called epic takeaways. And in this particular one, the key thing was about power of identity. And you keep referring to being in these smaller rooms, getting more efficient and being, larger. But the real thing you're looking for is more time with your family, right? That's the global impact.
Everything goes back to that. It's all the same answer.
Yeah, yeah. So with that impact, I mean, you made a statement in that chapter that was it was funny, but at the same time, I think it kind of identifies you, like the power and the identity part of it, about you having the ability to name essentially your 4 kids. You have 2 kids and you have 2 dogs. So I want you to kind of, like, on a funny note, I want you to kind of talk about, why the hell did you name your dog Dr. Pepper, and I think it was Toffee or Tuffy Kisses.
Toffee. Here, for those who can see, there's Toffee and there's Dr. Pepper right there.
So I want you to talk about, like the naming, like, obviously, the name of your book came from an episode of a podcast and made perfect sense, but why did you, name your 2 dogs those particular names in that chapter?
Well, one, because I'm like a little kid. I think that what I've seen in the really top entrepreneurs, no matter what their age is, they're like little children in a good way, childlike mindset, this wonderment and silliness. And then regular human adults, they don't understand, but an entrepreneur, they're like, oh, this is funny. And then names to me are very important. They're very important. Like, so uh, the one, like my wife she's a pediatrician, amazing mom, wife. She does most of the parenting because she actually knows how to parent. When it came down to naming the names of our children, it was very important to me that I, at least had a much bigger say in that.
Mhm.
I think well, no, I know I had the final say in that. It was very important to me, but most things my wife has the final say in everything actually, except. And then with the dogs, I mean, it's hilarious to name a dog Dr. Pepper. I just think that's hilarious because it's different and unique. And then Toffee Kisses, um, uh, I mean, it's just that's a ridiculous name, Toffee Kisses. And then
100%.
she looks like a toffee. And then I was talking to my 8-year-old when he was, well, he must have been 6 at the time. I'm like, if you had another dog, because he wanted another dog, he's like, what would you name it? And he's like, Kisses. I'm like, okay. So we wanted to, well, I wanted to name it Toffee and then Kisses. So Toffee Kisses.
Very cool. I was hoping that was to lead you into to bringing up your wife, and that brings me to
I
like,
did not name my wife. I did not name
well,
her.
I'm sure she's happy that you didn't name her, right? Because she would have had like a very interesting name. But to your credit, you give a lot of your credit, and even in your book, you dedicated the book to your wife's giving you the ability to fly. And so I
Right.
want you to kind of talk about what does that really mean for you to be able to give back to your wife like that?
Yeah, there's a pause there because again, I talk to 1 to 2 people like us every single week that don't value their spouse or never had a spouse or their spouse doesn't value them. And to me that's it's illogical.
Mhm.
Uh, it like um so the first thing I do every day is a grateful journal to my wife, what I'm grateful for her the previous 24 hours. Without my wife, bad situation. Um, if you think the opposite of us, that would be my wife. So warmth, empathy, rules, calendar items,
Mhm.
lists. Don't forget to pick your children up at school. I mean, she taught me how to say thank you. So I'm like, oh, that's um and our first date was the day before she started medical school. So that was August 28th, 2004. I waited until September 5th, 2004 to tell her I loved her because I waited a full week because I didn't want to say it on August 28th, 2004, even though I knew it on August 28th, 2004 that I loved her.
Mhm.
But I waited a full week, um, which for me wasn't easy, but like I just knew. And then she gets very aggravated by me because she's a stabilizing human married to an unstable visionary wackadoo, uh, and but she's also grateful in a way because now she takes more chances in life than she would have. She
Mhm.
has more of an adventure, and then she's made me barely a human, just barely a
Mhm.
little sign of humanity in there. So I'm endlessly thankful for that.
So, I mean, part of you being thankful, you came in chapter 2, you talked about this and the perfection of patterns. You talked about writing a journal every single day. Like that's part of your routine. You
Every
run
day.
3 to 5 miles, with every single day you write in your journal to be grateful towards your wife. So I want you to talk about that, like going from the dedication to dedicating yourself on such a long period of time every day. What is the end goal for this journal for your wife?
There's no end goal. No end goal. No, there's no end goal. No, I mean, there's no, I mean, uh, the reason why I do it
Mhm.
is because my wife's unconscious motivators, the number or the answer, her main unconscious motivator is for her to be needed and appreciated. So
Mhm.
the most important thing for her is for someone to say thank you to her. I don't care if anyone says thank you to me. I don't even think about it, but for her it's really important. So doing that journal gets me in the frame of mind to at least think about saying thank you to her no matter what she does, because she wants me to say thank you to her no matter, it doesn't matter what she does. It literally could be the smallest thing ever. Say thank you, say thank you. It's really important to her. So doing that journal is a good way of reframing my mindset to remember that.
Mhm.
um, but there's no end goal. um, it's just she's the most important person to me,
Mhm.
so I need to remember that.
Mhm. So if I could insert like what I see, and again, I'm going to bring it up based upon like the chapters of your book. In chapter one, The Cream Rises to the Top, you talked about your dad's diary, right? And then now you're talking about writing a journal every single day with gratitude towards your wife. Do you not think that the perceived end goal would to be the results for your kids to kind of see you doing this eventually, and for them to kind of come up with their own journal because you're going from your dad to yours to theirs?
Well, you're an ideator, so thank you for that. And that's so you literally just summarized how my brain works in the conversations that I have. So I talk to people like you,
Mm,
and they're like, I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll do that. No, there was no, I mean, that is a great idea. I think eventually they will see it. They know I do it. They've been hearing me talk about this on shows like this for years. Um, I mean, the best part of being an entrepreneur by far is that the kids get to see that this world even exists, and then they can do
mhm,
whatever they want with it. It's very interesting that you go to like, what's the tangible result of this? Um, for me, the only result is I think about like making sure I say thank you to my wife. I
mhm.
I do think the kids will have seen that. I just haven't thought about that until you brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, this just kind of going back to like the first chapter. I mean, there's probably multiple different reasons why you made that the first chapter, and I mean, you talk about your dad and your grand.
Because that it all goes back to the first chapter.
Yeah, yeah, and I think your dad essentially he's a hero. I mean, you're talking about his war stories. You talked about a guy jumping out of a parachute, bouncing like jelly. You talk about plane crashes. You talk about all these different things that your dad been through, and then you're talking about going into closing the book about how thanks, Dad, I've risen to the top. So I want you to kind of talk about, is that like a sense of pride, like you're living up to your dad's legacy, and how does all of that tie into the book?
And you have an interesting, you're a discernment galvanizer. Also an inventor, which is very interesting. That's a working genius assessment. Most people I talk to, they're wonder inventors,
Mm,
and I'm a discernment galvanizer. You're a discernment galvanizer with like some wonder and inventor in there. It's very interesting mix. But I mean, my dad is my litmus test. You're either someone who can you can get in a plane after another one has been shot down and you weren't wearing a parachute and that, or you're someone who makes an excuse. To me, it's a great litmus test to have. Like, I just don't understand people who make excuses.
mm,
It doesn't make sense to me when and then my mom, no excuses. My wife, day before medical school was our first date, no excuses. It's just like, that's the way to me, that's the only way to live life. Our kids, they make no excuses.
mm.
But it all goes back to what my dad said, the cream rises to the top. So I was very thankful, grateful to have him for 8 years of my life that I remember. He died when I was 13. He was 61 when I was born and would be 107 if he was alive now. So um I just don't understand why anyone would not want to be like that. Like, why would you not want to be a hero and truly just go for it? And and he's still number one in terms of heroes, even though he's not alive, because of the diary that he wrote from World War II and his lessons. And then, I mean, genetically, I'm half him, so that's in me at a very high level. Uh, it's in my blood, it's in my brain, heart, all of that stuff. And then I'm just executing on it. I just do it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally see it, and after reading your book, I like there's so many similarities from like your parents versus where you are right now with your wife. And I mean, and I'm going to compare these two things. I mean, your wife essentially, like you said before, she's constantly every single day keeping you in tuned with like the humanistic side, right? So she's
Every
essentially
minute,
your hero.
every minute.
Yeah. And then your mom really did save your dad post the car accident, and she was a nurse as well too. So it's kind of like how
Mhm.
history is essentially repeating itself in a different shape, a different form, but there's
Yes.
definitely similarities in these both stories. Would you concur with that?
Well, yes, 100%. And then I'll even double down on that because I see the world as not in numbers. I see it in numbers. So my wife's Colby is 8742. That is a stabilizing human, a lower quick start, higher follow through. My mom's Colby is 8642. So
Mm,
they're almost the same Colbys, even though my mom is pure hustle, survive and thrive. My wife is definitely pure hustle when it comes to getting through medical school and rotations and residency. So even though they're not entrepreneurs, they're not entrepreneurs. They have pure hustle and
mm,
no excuses. And then their brains, in terms of how they take action, they're wired the same way, which is they're totally different personality wise, completely different. But they are both caretakers. They're both caretakers, and then they both have pure hustle.
mm,
And my mom was telling me a couple months ago, um, when my dad was hit by the drunk driver in his late 50s and the drunk driver was killed, and then my dad broke all these bones but survived it because you don't make excuses. And then
mm,
he woke up in the hospital and my mom was his nurse. My mom was telling me when he woke up he thought he was dead and that she was like an angel, but she was a human, kind of. My mom's kind of a human, um, kind of. And then he wanted, or she wanted him to date her mom because they're the same age, but he's like, well, I don't have a family and had this amazing lifetime to have a family, and so he wanted to date her instead. So that's what happened, and then here I am. And then my wife to me is kind of like an angel. That's the way I kind of look at her, the same way my dad looked at my mom. I would say that's a good comparison.
mm. And to close out that chapter, you're talking about having angels, but essentially it's angels that help you execute. And that's like the main key takeaway that I took from that chapter is being able to execute.
Well, it's a partnership, and here's what I'll say in terms of execution.
Mhm,
My wife has allowed me to execute and be the person who I actually am.
mhm.
She's given me the freedom to do that. And then I've allowed her to execute on the person she is and then take more chances in life. Um, and so it's a good partnership with a lot of aggravation from me to her in the process because, visionary wackadoo married to a stabilizing human. So stabilizing humans get aggravated by that sometimes. But overall, it's a great partnership. It's
Mm.
a great, and then the the execution, the byproduct of that are two kids that are 8 and 10, both boys, and they're popular and nice and kind and have a lot of friends, and then they're half maniacs like me.
So I want to switch things up a little bit because I mean, obviously, like I'm a brand guy. So from the design standpoint, I was looking at your book cover. And I know you're very analytical as well, so there's had to be some meaning behind that cover. So I want to kind of break down. Like I see that you use primary blue and green, and blue symbolizes stability. Ironically enough, one of the keywords that you've used probably a dozen times since the show started. And green is more so about renewal and resurrection and life, which is also one of your keywords. Were those two colors picked intentionally for those reasons?
And you are a deep thinker with color. I see the world in numbers. You see like the world in keywords and color. I also see the world in keywords. Um, Tell me if this answers your question.
Yeah.
So my brain, I'm 100% black and white. There's no gray. My wife's 100% gray. I'm 100% black and white, but I was on a show like this and the host is like, you're 100% black and white allows you to see endless color in your life. I'm like, yes, that is correct. Thank you for saying that. You've helped me learn something about myself, which that's why I love doing these things because you learn in real time. So I'm like a minimalist, 100% black and white, and so I didn't really think about the colors of the book,
Mm.
other than I wanted something really, really simple and basic. I'm looking, and I didn't design it, um, but I did like the dots being connected, the
Mhm.
designer for it. I really liked that, because all I do is connect dots. So it was smart for them to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I see a lot of like symbolism and meaning too. I mean, obviously, if anyone is looking at this podcast or you have a time to go to Amazon and pull up his book, you can definitely see that the interpretation that I get is networking to build legacy because he could have put any silhouette that he wanted, but instead he picked a silhouette of a mom and dad with three kids and the grandparents. And that's what's the illustration that's on the cover of the book, which is kind of like something that, you know, you have to kind of process it to kind of comprehend it.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm thankful for your brain. You provided value of what the cover means. I just looked at it and I liked the well, I'll even explain this. So the Scribe Publishing published the book. Thank you. I'm very grateful. Scribe Media, they did a great job. And so then they sent me like to do the Audible because me doing the Audible wouldn't have been a great idea. So like they sent me like 8 people to listen to the samples for them to do it. So I listened to none of them. I didn't listen to any of them. I just looked at the names and then I typed in, I did a search for the word epic. And
Mm.
then one of the people in there in his bio had the word epic. So I'm like, go with him. So that was my, I don't need context or input or anything. Like I just, and then that was a good choice. David Lawrence the 17th, which is hilarious that he's literally, that's his legal name, David Lawrence the 17th. And I didn't know there were 16. That's a lot of generations, 16, 17 generations. But he did like voiceovers for Law and Order and things like that. So he did a great job with it. But that's how I make my decisions. Like it's it's very simple like that.
Hmm. So let's go into something like obviously every time someone writes a book, they want the book to be a top seller. They want the book to have accolades. And on your book, obviously you have the Golden Seal, you're a Wall Street Journal, and a USA Today bestseller. Like, how much of that do you know the behind the scenes, or is that just something that you kind of hired a team to execute that for you?
Yeah, the latter for sure. And again, if you're not a litmus test for people you serve, that's hypocrisy. So, purpose of life is to be connecting superhero for every visionary who shares stories with the world. So, I am visionary sharing story with the world. Being Wall Street Journal USA Today bestseller allows me to be a better visionary who does a better job of sharing story with
Mm.
the world, which helps me. I'm thankful for that, but it helps the PR partners and all the people I'm connected with. So I don't really care about any like it's just a title and a word, but like it does help. It does help serving the purpose of my life and being a litmus test for people I serve. So that was important. Normally, I don't care about any of that stuff, but in this case, it was important for that. And the second reason is most people write books and they're totally meaningless because there's no meaning behind it. They just do it and they don't even think about why they're just it's just pointless. And so there's nothing happens because there's no meaning. So I barely do anything, but if I do something that has to be at highest level, otherwise what's the point? It doesn't, the cream
Mm.
rises to the top, right? It always goes back to the first. So doing that and getting those accolades is part of the cream rising to the top. That is the structure of the world that we're in. That is part of what it takes to do that. So, okay, I will do that.
Yeah, I think the fact that our numbers they overlap so well because kind of like going back to what I said earlier, like when you finish your statement, it kind of just brings the next thought into my mind. And what you just said reminds me of chapter 4, right? I mean, obviously we talked about colors, we talked about meaning of colors, and the reality is nothing that really means anything to you, but winning the wrong game versus winning at the right game. I think that was a pinnacle chapter to kind of define what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. So I want you to talk about that chapter for a minute.
Happy to do that. Um, Thank you for asking that. With again, this idea did not come from me. I was talking to Jesse Elder, who's a true genius. He went off the grid for a while. He's a true genius. I was talking to him like these entrepreneurs, so many of them, they're talking about new car or big exit or all this stuff, but then they're really struggling with family or purpose or meaning, and they're like, oh, they're just winning the wrong game. I'm like, oh, that's a good
Mm.
idea. I'll write about that. Um, and to me, there's only one game. There's only one game to win. It's spending time with family and loved ones, and then living the purpose of your life. That's it. There, to me, again, I'm 100% black and white. There are no other games to play. So the dovetail to that is folks are like on shows or whatever, they're like, so how do you build collaborative global companies while putting your loved ones first? What's the first thing that, because entrepreneurs are really smart. Like they're highly intelligent, almost without exception, like super smart, very high EQ, like off the charts IQ and EQ for the most part. And so that's the first thing they can do is ask themselves what game they're winning, because they might not even understand what game they're not even thinking about the game they're winning in what context it is. So having them even ask that question is a good way to start thinking about what the right game is to win. And so again, to me, it's spending time with my family and then growing network on a global level and living in my purpose of life.
Hmm. Which then leads me to your epic takeaway is play your own game. I mean, that's what it really boils down to.
That's what I mean. So that's my game. That's the only game. There are no other games.
Hmm.
There's no end goal. It's just that's the game. There's no finish at the game. It never stops ever.
It's very, very cool. I mean, and like now that we're having this conversation, I can kind of see how and why you structured the chapters the way you did. Because in chapter 2, you had talked about the right mindset becomes the right outcome. So I want you to kind of talk about how does that work into like the perfection of patterns?
So this is the second time in hundreds of interviews. This is the second time where this is a compliment, where the host has realized that there was a structure to the chapter, even though I did not realize there was any structure to it until the host pointed it out. It was almost like an evolution of an album, a musical album
Mhm.
with like song. Okay. And again, I don't think like that, but maybe I do unconsciously or subconsciously. So the only chapter where I knew it had to be first one was the cream rise to the top, because it always goes back to that. It will always go back to that, because people who don't make excuses, they will rise to the top. Why? Because they don't make excuses, rise to the top. And then all this other stuff is irrelevant if you're not the cream that rises to the top in my game. I only will play with people that will rise to the top or do whatever it takes, period. There are no exceptions to that. They will not make an excuse. So it always goes back to that. And then if you are the cream that rises to the top, or who will do whatever it takes, no excuses, then that has to do with understanding the patterns and having the right mindset. That's the second thing. And then find your partnership, and then what game are you winning? And then it keeps building on itself, and then always goes back to the first chapter. It always goes back to that. And then the only other thing where it had to be in there in that particular point was the last chapter, chapter 30, which you probably were going to ask about, because you're feeding off me and I'm feeding off you. You're probably it's just enjoy playing, because at the end of this, what if you're not enjoying it, then you're not winning the right game. So I only wanted to make sure that the first chapter was where it was, and then the last one was there, and then I guess unconsciously it just kind of I just put it there like that.
Mm, mm. I think like you said, indirectly, you don't really you see everything in black and white unless it's like binary information, right? Either it's on or it's off. You see in numbers. So I want to talk about still in chapter 2, you had made a statement about see a problem, solve a problem. And for you, you've taken the equation of trying to figure out people by literally looking at a number. So I want you to talk about the Kobe index, right? And I can tell you what my Kobe index was. I mean,
2683.
yeah. Yep. So I want you to just talk about like the meaning of that, because people they just hear these 4 digits and they're thinking, okay, is that like a combination lock number? Like, what do those numbers really mean?
Yeah. So I'll give the Cliff Notes version of that, because I'm a high fact finder, and all my high fact finder does is to want to understand the patterns and the numbers. And then here's the answer: focus on the answer, eliminate non-answer. Okay, so almost without exception, and we only partner with visionaries who live in abundance and who look at things as investments, not costs, and want to change the world, not their, that their world is boring to me. Only the world is interesting because it's the cream that rises to the top, right? It goes. So almost without exception, I'm an exception, but almost without exception, a true visionary is an 8, 9, or 10 quick start. 8, 9, you're an 8. 10 is the highest. Almost all the people I talk to are 8, 9, or 10 quick starts. I'm a 7. Our firms have partnered with 2 people in 6+ years, only 2 under a 7 quick start that I know of. And I pretty much know everyone's Colby now. So I will talk to lower quick starts, and then not talk to them anymore because they don't execute on it. They think about it and then don't do it. So that's a pointless conversation because that's not the cream that rises to the top, or will do whatever it takes. So that takes time away from me and my family. So it's the Colby, KOLBE index. Takes 20 minutes. It's not your personality. I don't care what your personality is. That's meaningless to me. I want to know if you're going to do something. And then again, the number that I care about the most by far is someone's quick start, which again, 8, 9, or 10, almost exclusively is a true visionary.
I think it's definitely very, very interesting. And I mean, obviously, the epic takeaway for that particular chapter was seeing the patterns. So you've made the patterns very transparent by applying the Colby score. So I mean, that's only
Answer, and again, it just focus on there. I'm always interested when there's like an anomaly or something that doesn't fit the pattern, because it's interesting to know that too. But when you know the answer 95+% of the time, then here's the answer. You don't have to focus on the non-answer anymore. It's
okay.
confusing to me, but when you, I mean, so like, so if you partner, if folks want to partner with lower quick starts, that's great. If that's their audience, that's great. For me, we only partner with visionaries, and visionaries are almost exclusively 8, 9, or 10 quick starts.
Mm-hmm.
So there's your answer. And then you can mix in some of the other assessments as well. But again, for me, the best way to quickly simplify something is their Colby score. Sure.
So let's play off of that, right? So chapter 2, let's just summarize. You're talking about see your problem, solve your problem, and by solving your problem, you're giving people index scores that they're choosing on their own, and by knowing that index score, you know if you want to work with them or not. And then you go into chapter 3, which is not ironic. I think it's definitely a situation where indirectly you knew that chapter 3 had to be next, and you were talking about not to necessarily find your babs, but you want your babs to find you. So I want you to first define what the bab is and
Who's
talk
Babs?
about the title of that chapter a little bit.
Who is Babs? Babs. Yeah. So Babs is a genius. She is a real person. So I'm honored and grateful to be part of Strategic Coach, which is, one of the top, if not top, entrepreneur groups in the world. I've been in that since 2019. So it was co-founded by Dan Sullivan. He's a 10 quick start. 2-2-10-4 is his Colby. That's a pure visionary.
Mm-hmm.
And then he co-founded it with his wife, Babs Smith. Babs is a 9 quick start, also a visionary, but she's backstage. She built the company, the nuts and bolts of it, while Dan was out in front
Mm-hmm.
stage speaking and teaching and coaching people. And so for second company, which is the Networks 2023 Networks, it's a SaaS platform. If I tried to build a SaaS platform, I'd blow myself up or electrocute myself. So I had to find someone who could do that. I don't know how to do that. So I was talking to Dan virtually during Abundance 360, which is another top amazing entrepreneur group. Led by Peter Diamandis, who wrote the forward for Epic Life. Very grateful for that as well. But I was talking to Dan. I'm like, I need to find my babs for the second company, because I can't. It's impossible for me. I can't do that. I can't build a SaaS platform. He's like, well, the trick is have your babs find you. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I'll do that. So Strategic Coach has an impact. It's a tool called an impact filter. Filled that out. It's like all these things that need to be true for it to be a good partnership. And so then I started sending it out to people that I liked and trusted. And one of them was Mark Fujiwara, who's a 1596 Colby. That is a true unicorn score. 1596, you'll never meet another one of those. there's no way. And then I'm an 8671, which is also a unicorn score, but you'll never meet another 8671. I haven't in 6 years. I'll never meet another 1596. But anyway, so like I sent that impact filter to Mark. He's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. Let's do that." I'm like, "Okay." So he is full backstage, but he's a bigger visionary than I am. So I would describe him as a visionary integrator, just like Babs is.
Mhm.
So she's backstage, but a pure visionary. And then I'm an integrating visionary. So full front stage, but I can do some of the backstage stuff too. So that's why it works. It's a visionary integrator meeting an integrating visionary, and it's just full collaboration.
Hmm. Hmm. I think like breaking apart your book, it's so fun for me because again, like I can see like
Well, because your discernment galvanized.
yeah, like it's a fun book. So I mean, obviously to the listener, if you had not had an opportunity, I definitely want you to pick up this book. And again, we're breaking it apart like on a little deeper level. So like, and again, we only touched on 5 chapters out of 30. So think about like the complexity of this book, but it's also simply
Pretty simple.
yeah, it's simple when you actually read it, right? And which kind of leads me to like chapter 6. I mean, the title of that one is "The More You See Who, Not How, the More You'll See You Didn't See." Right? And it kind of you've been spitting out these numbers, you've been talking about these unicorns, but then you talk about Jason Lowe, like he's like an opposite unicorn. Like I mean, his quick start score
Full
was a
unicorn. Yeah, so he's definitely not a 5 quick start anymore. Definitely not. Um, but he at the time that he took Colby, he was a 5 quick start. So he's one of the 2 visionaries our firms have partnered with uh, in 6+ years who are under a 7 quick start. He's a 5, but he's really if he retook it, he'd be an 8 or 9. I don't think he's a 10, but he'd be an 8 or 9 for sure. Um, there's no doubt about that. But anyway, so again, not an ideator, but people like Jason are. So he said that, the more you see who not how, the more you see you didn't see. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll, write a chapter about that and dedicate it to him for that. And then he was basing that on Who Not How, which is a book that Dan Sullivan and then Dr. Ben Hardy had a collaboration on, uh, which is a tremendous book about not doing everything. I don't know how to do this. You just find a who to do it for you, just like
Mhm.
Mark found me, and then I found Mark, and so if there's something that I'm not great at or don't like to do or don't want to do, either there's 2 things that happen. One, I don't do it. 2, just find someone to do it for me, without exception. Without exception.
Which leads me into your epic takeaway for that chapter is focus on what you're great at. Like if you focus on that, it goes back to everyone else will be like you're a magnet and you're going to pull the other people that do what
Right.
you're not great at.
They'll find you.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely. So I want to talk about that for a minute. Like we've heard about conclusions, we heard about takeaways. Like what made you decide at every chapter that you wanted to write an epic takeaway? Because it's not necessarily a summary; it's more so something for someone to perceive and take action on.
Right. So again, I'm not an ideator. So the first book, Epic Business,
Mhm.
the publisher of that book, Rebecca Greider, she did a great job. She and her team, and she's like, "Oh, usually with these type of books, we have something called takeaways at the end." And then she and her team summarized the chapter, and then she made it epic takeaways instead of just takeaways because everything is epic for me. And then I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. My second book, I'll just put epic takeaways. So that's why, again, that's a great idea. I'll do that. So every book that I do from now on that I actually write, there'll be epic takeaways in it.
Yeah. Which obviously goes right back to your brand. So I mean, like from a brand standpoint, 'cause I'm a brand guy. I love the fact that you're naming those takeaways and you're
That's hilarious because I didn't even the first book I didn't even think about doing that, and then Rebecca and her team made the book much better because they added epic takeaways. But that's my point. Like I'm in my zone of genius, and then let people do what
Mhm.
they're great at. Great, perfect. Thank you. And now it's a template to use for any other book or however, or a discussion like this.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
here's the other thing that's interesting is that hosts and visionaries like you, they really appreciate that because sometimes they don't want to read the whole book. They just want the cliff notes, the takeaways, which is great. That's how I am too. Just give me the answer.
Yeah. It's like for me, I'm a transitional person, right? Like I like to read everything as fast as I possibly can, get all that data, and then make my own version of those cliff notes. And that's what we're doing right now. Like I'm
I
talking to
hear it.
you.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me. I mean, like we're running out of time, so I want to kind of just close it out, so that way somebody can kind of understand, like, in your final chapter, right? Just enjoy playing. You talked about that on February 10th of 20, I think I forgot the year was 17. Five
Yeah.
years from today is when you actually finish writing the book. So I want you to kind of talk about what did that mean for you as far as accomplishment, coming from 5 years losing the opportunity to have that money, but then 5 years later, money is not really an object for you at this point in time, but now you're really focuses on the epic life.
Well, there's a there's a lot to unpack there. One, being very grateful and appreciative of like having job salary cut. At the time, it didn't feel very it didn't feel great. That was the most that was the toughest. It was the best and worst thing in one day that's ever happened in my professional career, 20 years, and that's not even the top 100 worst days of being an entrepreneur. So that's what entrepreneur life actually is.
Mm.
So most people can't do that because they're not the cream that rises to the top, or they won't get into a plane after another one's been shot down without a, that's what, again, it always goes back to that. And now, finished the manuscript of the book on the 5 year anniversary of when job salary was cut. My wife's grandmother also died that day, right, literally like right when it finished. And so I added a couple lines about my wife's grandmother, who was a wonderful, wonderful human.
Mhm.
My wife's just like her. So it all came together. So glad my wife's grandmother's in the book, Esther, wonderful person. But it, you know, all this, those ups and downs of entrepreneur life, just to enjoy the life and appreciate the good and the bad, and especially the bad, really appreciating it, because that's where the true learning comes from, is the really tough times. Um,
Mm.
and so I talk to so many entrepreneurs who are, to me, they're winning the wrong game and they're not enjoying what they're doing because they're winning the wrong game. They're focused on things that they don't really like and or care about, so they're not enjoying it. And I just enjoy spending time with my family and talking to people like you and connecting people like you to people like you. That's fun for me. And again, there's no end. It will never stop ever. Just like, and I'll even dovetail that, which is, this is how I learn in real time. My dad died, but his lessons haven't stopped. They're still in the diary, they're in this book, they're still in me, they will be in my children, they'll be in their children, they'll be in those. So that's the way I look at it. Like, you if you enjoy what you're doing, enjoy playing, then it'll never stop. You'll never stop impacting people, even if you're not on the planet.
Yeah. I definitely see it, and part of, like, I'm gonna conjoin a couple different statements that you said in that chapter. And you said that God winks, and then you also talked about reminding you of the preciousness of life, and then you also thank your dad for you're rising to the top, like you said in chapter one, and then obviously your wife's grandmother dying, all of that collectively, and it was like a I seen you put emotion in that particular chapter, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, obviously people like us, we don't really deal with emotion per se. But in that chapter, I saw they were like, you kind of made that conclusion, brought everything back together. So I want to talk about, in closing, like, your epic takeaway for that chapter was no excuses, just investments. But at the same time, you're talking about family, you're talking about God winking, you're talking about your dad looking down, your wife's grandmother looking down. Collectively, what is the meaning going out of this book?
Well, that's what epic life is.
Hmm.
That's it. That's what that's what you just said. That's what, to me, epic life is.
So for someone that they're hearing about this book for the first time, right? And again, we only really covered probably 6 or 7 chapters. There's 30 chapters. If you had to pick your favorite chapter, which one would it
One.
be?
Number
And
one. Yeah.
number one.
Anything with my dad is favorite no matter what. He's the greatest I mean, he's the greatest vision. So Man's Search for Meaning is number one book. And for anyone who's not read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, I mean, that's the ultimate, no excuse. That's the ultimate of all ultimates. My dad's diaries, no, I mean, that's almost, and I don't say that lightly, it's almost as profound. Almost. Nothing is like Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, that you lose your entire family, life's work, survive the Holocaust, and then find meaning in that. That's the ultimate. But then my dad survived. It's a miracle he survived any of the stuff that he was in. Became an attorney in Nuremberg Nazi war crimes trial. Like, so he's almost like kind of like Viktor Frankl in a way. So anything with him, that's that's number one, because and then that's why it had to be the first chapter, because it always will go back to that. Always.
So if I may ad lib, I mean, the fact that you brought up Man Searches Meaning and the title of your book is Epic Life. And if I was to combine both of those, I would summarize it in Build a Brighter Future, which is one of the other key statements that you made in your final chapter. So for people that are listening, this book is just more so not just a business book. It's business.
Business book.
It's
No.
philosophy. It is so many different levels of you can take it so many different ways. You can take it as a life journey, right? You can take it as an entrepreneur. What should you be doing and how should you be doing it? But that's why I said like there's business aspects to it, but it's way more than that. I would say it's more like a philosophy, life way of looking at things kind of book.
Agreed.
So in closing, I mean, where does someone get the book? And again, like we want people to get this book because again, it has so much value behind it. Where do they go pick it up?
Thank you. I always think it's funny. We talk about life and purpose, and then end of interviews, it's like, where can you get the book? It's just so funny. Like but it is important, right? So the book's called Epic Life, and again, very grateful. Dr. Peter Diamandis wrote the foreword, and it's everywhere. Amazon, Books a Million, and Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target. It's all over the world.
Very cool. Well, from the epic boss himself, man, I definitely appreciate you being on another variation of the Boss Uncaged Network. I definitely appreciate everything that you brought to the table on both episodes. And again, this podcast is completely different than the other one. So if you hadn't had an opportunity to check that one out, the link is in the comments as well. So I want you to kind of look at both of these because again, you're getting two halves of one individual coming together to kind of give you the clear vision of what he's doing and how he's helping change the world.
Excellent interview, my friend. Always grateful to be here.